and Flurry, I believe, will be our next match to be fighting out who gets to face Shaxi. And we've seen some ups, we've seen some downs, but it has been exciting Hearthstone non-stop today.
I have to say, out of everyone, I've been very, very pleased with TIZ's plays. Tom as well, of course, but I think we've kind of learned to expect that caliber from Tom. TIZ as a newcomer, I don't know very much about him, but every time we've seen him play on stream thus far, I think his lines have made a lot of sense. I like his lineup. And it was very close there at the end. We thought he was going to take that win over Shaxi. So I would have to give the favor to TIZ, especially seeing that Flurry was, I think, fair to say, not at his best at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, definitely looking a little bit shaky at the start, which isn't to say that we should be counting him out by any stretch of the imagination. He's a very, very strong Hearthstone player, obviously, in addition to being one of the most popular Korean language Hearthstone streamers. I think the real difficulty here for Flurry, if I had to pinpoint it, would just be his aggressive lineup in what feels like a very controlling metagame from the majority of his opponents. The Rogue and the Mage, I think, will really start to struggle against Demon Hunter from TIZS, which runs an ooze. Highlander Priest, which runs an ooze as well. I feel like the Mage is really his best chance at trying to sneak in a win, but obviously it's last hero standing, so as soon as a deck doesn't win for TIZS, it's just out of the way.
And I'm glad that you bring up both of the oozes in TIZ's list, because that is not a tech that you would expect to see immediately if you're banning Warrior anyway. But the fact is, a lot of the meta is still running weapon-centric decks outside of Warrior, the Demon Hunter and the Rogue, as you mentioned. It's not unreasonable to say that if your opponent is going to be playing one of the popular decks, it's running either or even both if you want to go for Tempo Demon Hunter. So the ooze still runs into quite a few good targets there. I think that Flurry's Mage is probably going to be the here, even though it looks unfavored on paper. I've seen Mage take unfavorables just because of the nature of the deck being so flexible.
Yeah, it can really do the unachievable. It feels I have won some of the most disgusting games with Mage along the way, playing it a bunch on ladder. But unfortunately, it also has those games where it feels like it's just doing absolutely nothing. All your spells are just sitting in hand with anything to target. You don't draw the apprentice, all of that stuff. But with both of the players bringing Mage in one way or another, it's going to be very interesting to see how they both pilot it, because that is absolutely a deck, in my opinion, that is in the right hands, it's incredibly powerful. In the wrong hands, it just absolutely falls apart. You have to know how to play it, and also your specific build, especially when we factor in TIZS playing Shenvala and Jandis Barov, which you were saying you're a fan of, and Flurry cutting both of those cards from his list.
Yeah, it can definitely come into play later. There are some curves where Mage actually does want to play minions, and I feel that the inclusion of both of those cards plays more to kind of shoring up Mage's weakness, which is consistency, but it's less all in on trying to get the awesome Cyclone turns, right? So I would feel that the cutting those two versions is more your style of deck, Derek.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm on the Crane train, it's got to be said, in the school of thought, who even he has been having his doubts along the way as to how it should be built. But either way, I love the discussion it's been having along the board with Mage. One of the other interesting things that obviously doesn't get talked about on ladder at all is last hero standing queue order with the Mage. TIZS has now gone 2 for 2 in his games today in queuing up Mage first. I wonder if he's going for the approach of, this is just my deck that's most likely to sweep, so let's get it in right away, or if it's the kind of scouting deck is what it's kind of referred to as in Last Hero Standing, where you put it in, it may be able to get a win, brilliant if it does, but you have your strong counter picks waiting in the wings to counteract what your opponent is playing.
Yeah, I would have to think it's the latter, the scout deck, because TIZS is sitting on this Demon Hunter, which looks to be favored against more of Flurry's decks than it is unfavored against. And when you're the player that seems to have the better lineup in terms of having more good matchups across the board, I think you're the player that can afford to just send in a scouting deck first. And even if that lose, don't feel all too sad. However, it's Flurry that I do think is starting off with the deck that he feels has the best chance to sweep, which is the Priest. We did talk about how the Mage and the Rogue could fall victim to TIZ's controlling, I keep calling it control, Soul Demon Hunter. But the Priest, of course, I think still has a pretty decent matchup across the board.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty nice way of going about things for Flurry on the Highlander Priest. Sorry, fairly standard build of the deck. He's got a little bit of the Invoke synergy in there with Disciple of Galakrond at the start, but for the most part, it's just standard stuff that you're looking at in terms of a Highlander Hunter, which I absolutely agree. I think it's pretty well positioned against most of TIZ's lineup. Obviously, the mirror can get a little bit funky with the Highlander Priest going up against each other. But Mage in particular, I feel like is a perfectly winnable matchup. I would argue even slightly favored for a good Priest player.
And so for Mage to take this matchup, do you think it relies more on curving out or saving up towards a big mana cyclone turn? Or does it need to be both to have the chance?
It's a little bit of both. It's really a spectrum. It's not a discrete play where you play for tempo or you play for combo. I think the best players find that sweet spot between the two. I definitely lean towards being more of like a combo-oriented tempo mage player where I save up all these spells, Sorcerer's Apprentice, and huge pop-off, because I find that generating as many spells as possible is crucial in the matchup. To find those burst spells, that's really what helps me to get over the finish line against Priest. Is, if you can stick Jandiz, if you can stick Mana Giant plus Conjurer's Calling, eventually, as long as you have stuff to do each turn, something is going to stick on the board, and then you hit them for a bit of damage, Pyroblast, Fireball, whatever it may be to close things out, is what you need to get over the finish line.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for wording my question as an either or. I do also agree that the matchup is very fluid. I can ask this as an either or though. Would you rather have a list with Jandice and Shen versus Highlander Priest or one without them?
I think again it's kind of close because looking at the cards that they're cutting, TIZS has lost the devolving missiles, which against Priest can be pretty important. Being able to ignore their minions effectively when they stick down a big apotheosis can be a big deal. Just being able to devolve it and keep your minions going face. But at the same time, having Jandice just as a threat is very important as well. I think on average in this matchup, I would like a list that's a bit closer to TIZS that runs a bit more of the oomph. But even having said that, I much prefer a list with double Arcane Intellect. That's something that I'm pretty passionate about in the Mage deck, that you really want to have that extra card draw to cycle through to your power turns more consistently.
All right, Derek, you can never be on hot takes because if you're asked to stand on a side of the fence, you're going to try your best to be right there in the middle.
That wasn't fencing. I said I prefer TIZ's side, but okay. I prefer my own side most of all. That's the real correct choice.
Okay, so you can be on hot takes because obviously you just need to defend yourself at everybody else's expense in that show.
Exactly.
All right, we are ready to finally start off matchup, and TIZS has that AI in the opener. This, I feel, is one of the matchups that's slow enough that you keeping it. I do really like prioritizing card draw and saving up towards a big combo as tempo mage when you have the time.
Yeah, again, we're seeing this here from the APAC players where they really just are disincentivized from holding on to the Arcane Intellect. I can understand why, because hitting Astromancer on 2 or Lab Partner on 1, getting these tempo plays is powerful, absolutely, in the matchup. And if you can hit Lab Partner into Cram Session, that is the absolute dream. But I think I agree with you. I would have held on to the AI there to try and start shuffling through to my power plays.
It's especially interesting to me because you brought up as cards you'd rather have is Lab Partner and Solarian, but he also tossed double Primordial Studies, which are both very likely to hit either of those cards you were mentioning. So I was thinking at the very least one Studies would be kept, but it was a full mull there for TIZS.
It gets a little bit more complicated even then because due to the fact that TIZS is playing the slightly minion-heavier build that's cut some of the cheap spells, Primordial Studies can be one of your best ways to activate Shenvala later on, or your Mana Cycling. So using up those cheap spells is a big cost that you've lost at that point.
And TIZS going for the use of the coin just to make sure his Cram Session gets 2 draws here. He picked up a relative spell damage minion, so the Cram Studies would mean that if he's going to play it for guaranteed draw, it means Ogre Magi is not necessarily coming down on curve. Already, I'm just seeing many different ways I would have approached the early game compared to TIZS.
Yeah, and also already I'm starting to see all the ways that it is truly becoming Ogre for TIZS, because this development at the start of the game for Flurry is just so difficult to chew through. Even just with a 3-3 with a 1-3 inside of it, it's difficult to chew through all of this, and it's just going to keep chipping away turn after turn.
It does, however, have Brain Freeze and a good minion to pair alongside it. Yes, the lab partner will stick, but it's easily challenged by the 4/4.
Yep.
Another Cram Session looks pretty good to me. Although I know some people out there were screaming box.
Yeah, my brain being one of them.
Your brain is a person, yes.
Yes. Completely separate entity, as you may have been able to tell.
Well,
already though, we're starting to see one of those weird hands, in my opinion, with none of the cheap spells. He's got the Mana Giants, but it's going to be a little while before they activate. No Mana Cyclone, no Apprentice. It's a hand with a lot of meat. You know, this can keep going and going for a few turns, but it's kind of clunky and unreactive along the way.
It is unreactive, but I think that works in TIZZ's favor if he manages to get the board by around stayed ahead. I actually kind of like the look of this hand. Generally, you'd expect to see Jandis supporting this type of curve, but even a Conjurer's Calling on a 4-drop could prove problematic for Flurry to deal with. However, the Firebrand on Flurry's side of the board is going to get quite a lot of work done. 1 damage short of getting the full board clear, but the important thing is it dealt with the 4/1.
Yeah, interesting. I was kind of looking at Holy Smite on that turn. It's not like he needed the extra cards on that turn, and denying all the damage you can, or board control being kept as well, is quite important.
I think it's more that Flurry just wanted to spend his mana as efficiently as possible. Leaving a 3/1, I feel, is not very threatening at all, especially if he's planning to follow up with Zephyrus for AoE.
The real kicker, though, here for Flurry, I think, is he needs to plan out... Obviously, when to use Zephyrus is always important in these Highlander decks, but Elucia, for me, is the real turn on which this will all revolve, his entire game plan. Because as soon as he smells a hand that's like Apprentice and a bunch of cheap spells, or maybe the Mana Giants are starting to get really cheap so I can get those down, he wants to snap play Elucia and just steal all the juice from TIZZ's hand.
Yeah, that has happened to me way too many times on ladder for my liking. This turn was not really efficient in terms of removal. I don't feel it warranted a Zephyrus to deal with everything here.
Yeah.
And Soul Mirror just to get the Prime in his deck seemed like too frivolous a usage. So landing on the Kronks here, I think, makes a lot of sense. As for TIZZ, it could just be a Rolling Fireball and Violet Spellwing turn. Doesn't feel very strong, but every generated spell he gets to play and cheapen the Mana Giants further, as long as he's able to get down the Conjurer's Calling, I think it's fine for the next turn.
Yeah. And the main thing for me is I think that he's not going too all-in, which is a pretty big deal. If he'd gone like Rolling Fireball Mana Cyclone just to use all his mana, get a little bit of generation now, I think that would show that he doesn't appreciate how long this matchup could go, because even though, as you said, he's got a meaty hand right now which can keep applying the pressure, there's a really good chance that Flurry just deals with all of it quite quickly, and then he has to rely on the top of his deck to pull himself back.
And Flurry's hand, it feels very powerful, but strangely enough, TIZZ has not put anything on board that Flurry feels is worth reacting to.
Right.
Do you ever just take this as a player Galakron turn? You can also
That's what
renew.
I'm looking at. Yeah, definitely.
Starting with the Renewer makes a lot of sense.
Ooh. Can Luminance do anything cheeky?
Wasn't seeing it. I was looking at the Shadow Word Pain, but assuming that it would still end up being a Galakron turn. Though, this is a pretty good chance to just get ahead on board. I just underestimate Kael'thas as a 4/6 body. It's pretty annoying for Mage still.
Definitely looks like he's going to be leading up to Mana Giant plus Conjurer's Calling. It's scary, obviously, because you know that Zephyrus or Galakron or whatever can probably clear a lot of it off. But that's always going to be the case. You've got to start getting these threats on board, I think.
And 2 rather lackluster 8-drops.
Job done.
They're big enough that they die to Shadow Word Ruin, but not small enough that they one-shot the Kael'thas. That's just...
So, trade Zephyrus Ruin is definitely the first port of call that you could look at. Doesn't even deem that worthy.
Just gonna go for a Galakrond death turn.
Yeah.
That looks fine. He stays ahead on board and gets that hero power down. It's not looking like the healing is necessary whatsoever for Flurry.
Okay, the threats are starting to pile up now for TIZS. This hand has some refill potential. If he can find Magic Trick or Evocation, some of these powerful spells to refill his hand, this is nowhere near over yet.
And if Flurry starts to smell that, though, we could be looking at an Elucia.
That's true. That is true.
However, it's also the case that Flurry's own hand is not stuff he wants to give TIZS. Soul Mirror in there, Renew, and even a Zephyrus. Even if it's not active for TIZS, TIZS could dump that away. So Flurry might want to be using some of this other stuff before he steals TIZZ's hand. It's always a tough dance, though, because if you wait that one turn too long, sometimes TIZS gets to use everything he wants to.
I mean, it's worse than that, right? Because they swapped the deck, so Zephyrus and Alex would be active.
Oh, right.
Straight away. So I think definitely using Dragon Queen and Zephyrus first is probably too crucial before you throw down Lucia.
And it does look like TIZS has to go off this turn. Oh, okay. Go off in a different way, I suppose. Not quite enough spells, nor a good Conjurer's target to justify this as a Mana Cyclone turn, so...
Yep.
Prime time.
Already too slow of a play. You've got to show Solarian that you believe by throwing him down at the first possible frame.
It was pointed at the center. I got extremely excited.
Alright, we'll take that though.
Yeah, full board clear, end with a 7-7, and most likely, I was looking at saving this Flame Ward actually for the Apprentice turn.
Yeah, I guess that mana could potentially start to get a little bit clogged if he wants to go for like an Apprentice, Giant, Cyclone, Conjurer's Calling all in one massive, crazy fell swoop turn.
Yeah, given that he can just play Giant for super cheap and go Conj anyway, I think it's fine that he played Flame Ward there.
So testing for Counterspell first here with the Raised Dead.
He hasn't tested for Spellbender though, so we could still see him take the Silence. Or could go for a Shadow Word Ruin play and just get down the cards. It's looking, I mean, could be caster visioning, but I would like to see Flurry get down the Zephyrus so he can go Elucia ASAP.
It's just whether or not he even needs to, you know, like he can just hold on to Zephyrus to heal or remove whatever he wants. Like this turn, like you said, he's now tested for Mirror Entity with the Vulpera, so just being able to go for Kaj plus Shadowward Horror is, or Shadowward Ruin, sorry, is very, very powerful.
A good point, especially since outside of the Giants, there aren't any Shadowward Ruin targets after the Solarian Prime. Flurry is just taking this extremely slow. And it's a good point. I always get tunnel visioned into how powerful the Elucia for disruption can be. But Flurry, the resources he would have to give up to optimize that disruption are cards that he would use for control anyway. We can just hold on to Elucia, not to ruin TIZZ's game plan necessarily, but as a back when Flurry's initial game plan goes wrong.
Okay, Hulking Overfiend, we will take that every single day of the week. He could then pop the Kaj and freeze the Prime, I suppose, inside of it. Or just leave it frozen, also to deny the spell damage.
Yeah, and he could even potentially keep the Overfiend as possible. Okay, Ancient Mysteries, a second Cyclone will get him back 5 spells.
Oh, he's not playing the Cyclone.
I am very surprised, but it could just be that he values setting up against Soul Mirror, and if that's not there, or if the board can't be dealt with, he's just looking at this Pyro level. It's very valid.
Oh, yeah. It is, because he has a Pyroblast in hand now, which what I was talking about, that is what you want to get, the extra burst damage, but I am still skeptical of this, because, you know, a card was just discovered off Vulpera, there's so many other cheap spells in the deck, you have to imagine there's going to be some way to proc the counterspell first.
But even if we are looking at Soul Mirror, it doesn't actually deal with that many minions. It deals with the dynamic duo of the Apprentice and Cyclone. But the Overfiend and the Iron Lucent Bark would still be alive, right?
Right. You can mitigate that obviously somewhat with the Penance first.
Yeah, having Penance plus Renew or plus Counterspell procer is huge there for sure.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of that previous turn from TIZS. I'm trying not to be results-oriented here with the way it worked out, but we were looking at potentially a lot more spells in hand on this turn.
He is still going to default onto the Mana Cyclone plan, but it's just for 2 spells now. Prime already been used.
He also could have frozen the Prime, but he knew that he was going to generate Ray of Frost anyway, so why would he go with that line?
Job done.
Sorry, how would he have frozen the Prime?
Well, he could have attacked into the Lucent Bark and then traded his Volpira into the
Oh,
damaged.
okay.
But
then you missed 4 to face, Derek.
You missed damaged face, of course. But
Yeah. Yeah, I get your point. I get your point. I do think that TIZS was okay with potentially leaving up a 7/7 for attacking, though. He kind of knows that his only chance at winning is getting damage to face here. It's all but a dream now, though.
insane swipe there. Arcane Intellect is kind of the best card that he could hope to get there, for sure.
So now we're looking at an Evocation out. Evocation into Magic Trick, into... man, you can't even go Evo into Box anymore without Apprentice.
Well, there we go.
Job done.
Evocation into, I don't know, freeze the board. Maybe you can get yourself a spell that generates Puzzle Box later on as well.
Yeah, it's just, you go Turtle, but with Evocation and Magic Trick instead. So Evocation into Freeze,
Yeah.
plus Magic Trick to get you another Evocation. Repeat steps 1 to 3 until Priest loses. I don't think that's a thing.
One Thief, that can get you a... I don't know, another Pyroblast? So you can just go Pyroblast, Pyroblast? Or Puzzle Box, more likely on the following turn.
Gotta think bigger, we need the boxes. There's a Power of Creation, but the Blizzard is also looking necessary given that Flurry is threatening quite a bit of damage.
It's just the eggs though, they just turn into the rushes straight away.
You could just go Missile's Power of Creation, Believe.
I kind of feel like he has to play Wand Maker though, or Wand Thief specifically to hit Puzzle Box on this turn, or he's just too far behind.
These are insane
good
though.
one, though.
Now the Devolving Missiles can get a lot of work done potentially.
It's true.
Okay, I guess on average, the remaining minions after the missiles are done could still be bigger than 4/5. So I can respect the freeze. But Flurry can just go for a Murazond of his own.
Murazond? Yep. That sounds pretty good to me.
Evocation, Power of Creation, Rain Freeze. Okay.
Sure.
And he can just play his Evasive Worm as well. Trade down these Gyrocopters.
So perfect.
And so we're looking at Wand Thief into Evocation into Blizzard Magic Trick for another Evocation.
Right, yeah. We're going very, very deep down the rabbit hole now.
I don't even know if there was mana to do all of that. Make it Frost Nova, not Blizzard. And that's not it.
Yeah, just dead on board, I think. Even if he can ping away a little bit. The Pyroblast will be able to very, very cleanly get the job.
Let's make something real.
And this is all with the Elucia still in hand.
Yeah, not even needed along the way, just all the power cards for Flurry coming in. And I think the real kind of crunch turn, the turning point, for TIZS that we can argue about was the play where he held back on the second Mana Cyclone, didn't generate too much more value. I will say it's unlikely. I think that would have turned around the outcome of the game all that heavily, because that was really when Flurry started to turn things up to 11, playing out the Zephyrus, playing the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, that just shut his opponent out the game. But the counterspell, I think, was just too optimistic there. It was so unlikely to win him the game.
Yeah, looking back on it again, he could have gotten 5 extra spells. If any one of those was a box, I feel like that was his best avenue into the game. He needed something really impactful. I hate to say it, we always end up on, we need the box, we need another Solarian Prime, but that's just how the Mage deck operates. It runs so much generation and has that always in its back pocket as a win condition, which is why it's sometimes scary to face up against. The one counter spell was relying on the board he had to stick, and it probably wasn't going to be enough there. Ultimately, though, that's a very big win for Flurry, because now TIZS doesn't have this kind of unpredictable deck to rely on.
Yeah, it's big in a way for Flurry because he gets to hold on to the Priest, which is arguably his best deck in the lineup, especially given how ill-suited, in my opinion, the rest of his aggro lineup appears to be. But in another way for TIZS, losing with the Mage, it's not the strongest deck in the metagame, in my opinion, as much as I love it. So I think TIZS definitely has what it takes with the Priest and the Demon Hunter to turn things around. Before we get to see whether or not he will do that in our elimination match of the day, we're going to go to a very short break. And when we come back, TIZS, even though he's 1-0 down, will be trying to wrestle things back in his first week on stream in Grandmasters. We'll be right back after this.
제가 그러지 못하기도 하고, 그래서 이제 그런 재밌는 사람이 되기를 원하고.
둘 중에 하나 선택해야 된다면 제일 똑똑한 사람이 네, 되고 싶어요.
I would rather be the funny man than intelligent man. But in fact, I think I am the intelligent man, not funny man.
我会选择做一个最快乐的人吧，就是最快，因为我觉得，在一个很多人的地方的话，很多人的地方很需要有一个就是很懂得搞气氛的人，不然会很无聊。
I feel like being the funniest person in a room requires a lot of energy. It's very exhausting, I feel like. And I'm just more chill, laid back. I'd rather be the most intelligent person.
比较搞笑，比较开心啊，可以让很多人开心啊。
Do you think you are the most intelligent person in this room?
Do you think I am the most intelligent person in this room? No, I think Soro is the most intelligent person in this room.
Correct answer.
You are watching Hearthstone Grandmasters in the Asia Pacific region. Here, of course, on the Hearthstone Esports YouTube page, where all of the top level competitive Hearthstone action will be broadcast. So make sure that you subscribe to be notified whenever we go live every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the foreseeable future. The next couple of months is jam-packed with Hearthstone action across all three regions. It's going to be a lot of fun. But already, Gia, today we've been seeing a lot of different strategies, a lot of different decks performing with various amounts of success. And with the Mage taking a loss there pretty quickly for TIZS, it is definitely looking to me like the metagame here at the top 8 is very much so that aggro hasn't found its sweet spot in the metagame so far.
Yes, we have been seeing the Soul Demon Hunter take its place, but you know, there are people that argue that is an aggro deck just because of how often
That's
it goes
fair.
face with the weapons. It doesn't operate like that all the time though, because you do have to rely on some amounts of removal with the Soul Shears, the Blade Dances, the Shatter Shard Mystics. But it definitely feels that Mage has not been the premier deck, and neither has Rogue.
Yeah, it's really felt like it's struggling because the weapon removal is very devastating to the weapon archetypes of Rogue with Self-Sharpening Sword. Maybe with some of the lists that we're seeing from other regions, like I think Frozen and Bloody Face maybe, are playing the like Vendetta, Questing Adventurer, Edwin builds that rely on comboing lots of different cheap spells and minions together, which I think does have a lot of potential. The weapon Rogue at the moment, though, hasn't quite found its spot. But one deck that seems to have very much found its spot in the metagame is Highlander Zephyrus Priest, specifically when you draw Zephyrus in your starting hand every game, what it looks like.
Yeah, Flurry has been doing that pretty consistently, doesn't have the Raise Dead immediately to get value off of that, but rips a Volpera off the top, gets a nice way to fill out his curve, but I'm pretty sure he's saving this Zephyrus until it's going to be a bit more impactful. Didn't necessarily just want Wild Growth or Animal Companion when he knows that this Demon Hunter can pretty handily deal with that size of minion.
It's kind of a tough choice there, actually, off of the Volpera. I really like the slow, deliberate thinking there, because for me, that would have been, if I'd had to make a second gun-to-my-head choice, it would have just been Apotheosis. You really want the heal. But Flurry is instead deviating to Wave of Apathy, which is very interesting.
That was actually the first one I was looking at just because of how cheap it is. But when I did my double take, I was thinking, how many minions are there actually that you want to neutralize with this card? Looking at the list from TIZS, this is the list that has both the Glaive-bound Adepts and the Soul Shard Lapidary. So the Wave of Apathy could get a lot of work done later on. Apotheosis, yes, it's a lot of heal, but it requires the prerequisite that you have a minion stick on board before that. And I feel that if TIZS is ahead with a couple minions, it's not that likely to happen. There's Shatter Shard Mystics in the deck that let him swing without committing face damage necessarily.
Now that we've reached this point from Flurry, I'm not looking at Zephyrus on this turn so much as I'm actually looking at Elucia, because TIZS still has coin in hand, which means even if you're only getting rid of like a little bit of extra tempo, or extra damage, I suppose you could say, is it worth going for it there?
But then you give TIZS the Zephyrus, right? The active Zephyrus.
Yeah, I guess so. It's not that good there though, like it's only turn 4. It can't get a huge Edwin or anything off of it.
I mean,
I guess you then lose the Zephyrus.
it's the thing that if you go Elucia and then you get coin, you're not guaranteed to have a good play with that coin.
That's true.
Versus if you Elucia and give the Zephyrus, TIZS is guaranteed to have at least a decent play for that turn.
Yeah.
So I did like holding back on Elucia. It's painful to use Zephyrus for a very low value like that, but I think Flurry is recognizing still that he can just get Elucia for the next turn and not necessarily give TIZS anything that good.
It's a great point, actually. It's just, I was going to say this is, again, a very low-value Zephyrus, but we've been seeing that more and more from Priest for the dual reason of one of them being, of course, Raise Dead. You want to get it down to get it back in your hand. And also Elucia, like you said, getting this dead is a pretty big deal in terms of just giving your opponent a bad hand in response.
And for this Madame Lazul choice, given that Adept and Blade Dance both require an additional thing to get active as a Priest, I think Twin Slice is there. Lazul also made the turn very easy for Flurry there, because if that were not the draw, we were looking at just Ooze.
Yeah.
And that was quite awkward. But this Shadow Shard Mystic looks pretty clean for TIZS. Does mean though that he's not developing anything significant alongside it.
Yeah. I definitely like the idea of going for Shatter Shard over Blade Dance as well. I think that in this matchup, Blade Dance often gets used more as like single target removal or just a couple of big minions, whereas this is obviously perfect Shard Shatter on this turn. It was really just whether or not you play up the Spectral Sight as well.
Yeah, that was definitely something worth considering. For TIZS though, sitting on this Lorekeeper Polkelt and having 2 of the 5 drops in hand, I don't think he's necessarily looking to get more draws in hand, as opposed to curating his draws with the Polkelt for the next couple turns. Of course, you would like to play Polkelt when there's nothing too threatening for a Gnosis on the other side, so we could see him hold back on it another turn and just see a pretty clean Lapidary hero power.
Even then, though, I feel like if we were to see Tom playing this matchup, there's a very decent chance he'd just like smack face and leave up the Kronks here. Like, he has Blade Dance in hand. He can use that to clear it off while getting the damage through to face instead.
It's true. This of Lapidary goes for the Glaive Bound, which is even more damage on board, so I can see the reasoning behind it. I'm also potentially seeing that he wants to hold on to the Lapidary to pair with Blade Dance. That is a very powerful board clear.
Great point.
And for Flurry, he can go for a clear of his own with Shadow Madness Twin Slice, but that seems pretty inefficient with the rest of the mana probably getting spent on Renew, and also he has to take 6.
You can try and hit Zeph first to get a nice, easy board clear, which he does do.
Zephyrus with the 5 mana remaining, I'm looking at Explosive Shot potentially.
The future is clear. Your demise.
Okay, looks like he's just gonna go for an Apathy turn. That's fine. Set up possibly bigger Soul Mirror.
Okay, I'm fine with this. He's got a nice clear now with Twin Slice plus Blade Dance as well. And Zephyrus is, again, much more flexible than this. There's a good chance he needs to save it for like Healing Touch later on for just that extra bit of healing as well.
So the militia is drawn off the top now. He can Polk out to guarantee Skull for the next turn. But it's getting a little bit awkward because there's just the one soul fragment in the deck right now. So if he wants,
Right.
if TIZS wants to lapidary, then the militia is shut off for the near future.
And then, of course, if you go for Lawkeeper Polkelt, you're not going to get any of the Soul Fragment cards for quite a long time as well, which again makes it that little bit more awkward. But, you know, you could just bypass the whole Soul Shard mechanic for a while. He doesn't need to hit that.
Yeah, that's definitely fair to say. Because just Polkelt and Hero Power and just make sure you get Skulls off the top for the next turn doesn't feel too weak whatsoever.
I see.
Okay, going for the draw first. Oh, I thought he was going to end with the Polkelt there. And yeah, you can still coin it out. My mistake. No need to Hero Power.
Yeah, obviously, correct order as well. You never want to go for Polkelt coin shuffling because that then, of course, reshuffles the order of your deck when you shuffle the
I have definitely
Soul
done
Fragments
that
in.
on ladder before.
Yeah, we've all been there. We've all been there.
Alright. Flurry can go for the Twin Slices Blade Dance clear.
Yeah.
It's a little bit short of dealing with the Polkelt. But he can just face tank it.
I must consider.
I think you want to avoid that if that's at all possible. Like every minion hitting face here is a big difference.
It's true. So we could look at the Shadow Madness instead used here. Everything just seems a little bit inefficient.
Yeah, like you can fit everything, you know. You can go for the Blade Dance, the Shadow Madness, and Radiance as well.
Ah, okay. Just using the Forbidden Words instead to not face tank this.
I'm okay with this. Especially as it's worth considering at this point that Zephyrus doesn't have to be used for healing. Zephyrus into Tyrion or Inner Demon to be able to kill off TIZS is not a ridiculous proposition.
Alas, poor warlock.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at the race possibility, but the fact that TIZS has reordered his deck to put these powerhouse cards on the top and not Eldrazi Warblades, it could be that TIZS is running low on healing at the moment. However, just the Zephyrus is not enough to pull Flurry out just yet. He still has to be the defender here, 100%.
He does, yes, he does, of course. But my thinking is really just if he can get down Illucia, that of course can steal quite a lot of damage from TIZ's own hand immediately, which would be a pretty big deal.
And that could be why we're seeing TIZS prioritize some of the cards on the right. I was definitely just looking at Marrow Slicer, Glavebound, and Skull for this turn.
Yeah.
But looking at it a bit more carefully, he of course needs to think about just setting up 2-turn lethal, in which case you want to use some of these slices.
Yeah, fitting in the hero powers. This is just absolute 100% maximum damage efficiency every turn is the name of the game.
And now Flurry. Gonna have to pull the trigger on this Radiance. Wave of Apathy is also a pretty good draw here. And Zephyrus can give weapon removal here.
Again, I'm still just spending too much of the time each turn thinking about Illucia because he knows that there's a skull for 3 mana at the right-hand side of TIZ's hand if he's been paying attention. Which, of course, is kind of good, but then he gives discounted cards to his opponent when it swaps back, and he gives Zephyrus to TIZ as well.
That's the big one. I do not want to give Zephyrus when I'm at 12 here.
Yeah.
If he plays Zephyrus now, I think it'll give healing as an option, plus weapon removal, plus a way to deal with Glavebound. If you go Radiance first, Zephyrus might not give the healing option anymore.
A simple spell should
But I think it's a win for Flurry as long as he removes the weapon and neutralizes the Glavebound one way or another.
Your wish is my suggestion.
So it looks like he's going for Ooze here.
Okay, yep, sure.
Yeah. So he's holding on to the Radiance one more turn. Looks a little bit risky, but he did see all of TIZ's discounted cards except one, which he should know is Skull because of the Polkelt.
Yep.
So in terms of how much damage can be laid out without the skull played, it's not going to be 12 at maximum, I think.
Yeah, it's 10 here. Which is, you know, worth considering. You could just jam this all to face and hope that you can draw it next turn. But I think that's maybe a little bit short-sighted considering what the priest could throw down in response.
Yeah, Apotheos is always very scary, and this militia is pretty well charged. This ends the turn with board initiative and gets to push Flurry all the way down 10. Extremely tense here. Flurry has been so patient with this Radiance, but it's gonna come in clutch.
Whoa. It's getting closer and closer. Obviously, Soul Mirror is tempting on this turn, especially as he can heal up for a lot in the meanwhile. But now with Shadow Word Death, he could just start trying to go off with the Sethek instead.
Ooh.
It's risky.
It really is. So if he goes Soul Mirror and Radiance, if your follow-up play is Illusia, that gives TIZS not very much to work with for the foreseeable future. But it also doesn't guarantee Flurry a way to heal even further. Not gonna lie, my mindset was just at surviving for as long as possible, but I wasn't accounting for the post-Illusia turn. Flurry in the end there decides that Soul Mirror is gonna be the play, and he holds on to Radiance yet again. I've been wanting to play this for how many turns now?
Yeah, I know, and it's getting real scary. This is a lot of damage that can come through, which demands an immediate and robust response from Flurry.
TIZS has been holding onto his cane judiciously to go over the top of a taunt. And I was looking at this being an Illusia turn again, but because the Alexstrasza was drawn, it's not an option anymore.
Yeah.
Because he would give TIZS the active Alexstrasza.
Yeah, just that little bit too scary, I think.
Uh-huh. So we've seen some pretty godlike blade dances in APAC before. Or was that during the Masters tour?
Oh, what? Do you want to go Magtheridon and snipe all three of the guys here?
Okay. I don't want to, but I'm saying...
But he will.
I'm saying it can happen. I mean, I just want to unlock the skull.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right?
But it would require either giving Flurry 3 more guys on board or playing down the cane before you have lethal. This is deciding to just play it without the outcast value. I'd have to imagine he's looking for second Marrow Slicer.
I think this is smart from TIZS as well. With all the soul fragments in the deck, he only missed out in this instance on 2 mana discount on the soul shield. Not that relevant, really.
Can keep cycling with the mana feeder, but he knows now that he's gonna be leaving these minions up, praying there's no apotheosis. Just setting up for Kayn for the next turn.
Yeah.
And now, is it finally the Illusia turn?
Starting with the penance, see what he can generate there.
I mean, that is really huge.
That's more heal. That's got to be the play on this turn instead, right? Illusia can wait a turn again.
I mean...
We could just throw it down at the end.
You Nova go up to 10, and then you're alive versus Kayn plus... Okay, I have to admit, I am not sure how much damage there is left in TIZS' deck. If there's another Marrow Slicer, then he does have to heal, because Marrow Slicer Kayn hero power is GG. Okay. Man, I was just looking at Illusia again to steal Kayn, and then if TIZS plays your Alexstrasza, then you get back the Plague of Death and can deal with that. Oh, but this now...
So now it's Magtheridon in play, clears almost all the board. Obviously, there's still the 2-1 in play that he has to contend with.
But there's this Soul Shear in Hero Power that can go face. It's just that every turn Flurry waits, he's just taking an extra 1 damage because of TIZS' Hero Power, and Flurry doesn't have his natural healing Hero Power anymore. So in order for Flurry to outlast, he needs to discover more healing or deny TIZS' value. And I've been looking at the Elucia for many turns to deny the Kayn. Like, Flurry could be thinking it's not necessarily even in hand yet.
Right.
And if you give Alexstrasza to TIZS plays it, your response is Plague of Death, but that's the whole turn. And then, so TIZS nets damage with his hero power.
I mean, it's kind of the whole turn, but there's obviously 1 mana left over, which means you can play the 1 remaining dragon from your hand afterwards, and maybe threaten counter-lethal. Like, it gets so many levels more confusing.
I know a lot of Hearthstone players hate Elucia because it ruins your fun. I'm going to come out here and be honest and say I hate Elucia because it's too hard for me to play.
Oh! He gets Shadow of Death. He can now go Psych Split on the Magtheridon and then death it.
I think he's thinking Death Elucia instead.
Elucia instead? Okay,
He's trying to rip the Kayn. And he does absolutely rip the Kayn and the Spirit Jailer. And now we are getting to this Alexstrasza conundrum that you and I were discussing.
Was that better though? If he went for Psych Split, he could have forced TIZS into going for Plague of Death instead, just to stay alive.
Is it forced? He wasn't setting up lethal.
I guess so, I guess so.
He would have 13 damage.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh my gosh.
But in the end, he just gives lethal to TIZS with Psych Split.
I didn't see that!
With Shadow Madness, neither did Flurry, clearly! What?
And TIZS spots it immediately. I mean, Flurry obviously wanted to deny the Kayn. That was the whole point of him going for
he
Elucia.
Just gave lethal. What? So he didn't know when he swapped hands originally that there was going to be a Kayn in TIZS' hand. But he obviously knew once he'd swapped that he shouldn't have played Kayn, or he was just dead 100% of the time. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
So the play was just gonna be Spirit Jailer pass, I assume?
Yeah. Well, that's the only line that you can take at that point. But even then, I think it still loops back to just trying to force your opponent into going for removal by copying their Magtheridon and then forcing them to Plague of Death.
Yeah, a soft force. I mean, it would not necessarily have been lethal the next turn, but if the Demon Hunter hadn't drawn their own lethal over 2 turns, then they would have had to remove. Yeah, I'm gonna repeat my original statement that Elucia is hard. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Undeniably, that was not a situation that Flurry will have seen before or likely will see again for a long time. What I will say, however, is that, this is the best players in the world going up against each other, or at the very least, here in Asia Pacific. And making plays like that is where you lose percentage points. It's razor thin, the margin between these players, and you got to get your advantage while you can. And so far, Flurry today has not been showing that he deserves to be right up at the top of the totem pole.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, even though that last spot was... it's something you can figure out, so by that margin, I want to call it obvious in terms of he had perfect information, but getting in the right mind state to predict that when I'm pretty sure for several turns, Flurry was just thinking about, how do I time this Elucia? Is this the time to steal the Kayn? I'm going to get the Kayn. Then when you lock yourself into that mindset, the mistake is very understandable, despite it being obvious. That's how I want to phrase it, at least.
Well, very weird way to end up that game there. But now, of course, we're heading into Demon Hunter once again, finding a pretty nice matchup, I would say, for the most part. The Weapon Rogue here does have a pretty nice starting hand. That I will definitely say, with Self-Sharpening Sword into Toxin Blade and Deadly Poison, with the draw as well to go alongside it. But one thing I find is that the Demon Hunter is able to so consistently remove all the damage off the board whilst getting damage to face that I think it's just in a great spot in the matchup overall.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that general assessment. I do think that this particular type of draw, though, is the juice for Flurry, and also for TIZS, without the Eldraki Warblades and the ooze that he's running in the deck, Flurry might be able to race here. He just has such an insane next turn. The Volpera, Deadly Poison, free cutting class.
It's insane. Ooze is what you need here for TIZS to be able to turn this around, because that, of course, gets him closer with the cutting class to Dr. Krastinov to be able to up the durability on the weapon as well. It's looking pretty scary already for TIZS.
Yep, this matchup is a whole lot of people hitting each other in the head with their weapons. It's glorious to behold.
It really is.
And
look at
Flurry
this.
already sitting on a double eviscerate hand.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
This is pretty disgusting.
And because the curve works out this way, you just see him coin out the stealth minion, try to get that 2 damage soon as possible. I love it. He has a combo activator for the eviscerates with that spectral delinquent and possibly the hook scimitar as the activator instead of the benefiter of combo instead for the next 2 turns.
Yeah, I guess I'm okay with that. There's obviously a couple of things it's weak to with Blade Dance and the Mystic as well, being able to clear up this board quite nicely. But outside of those things, like you say, it's easily the best use of the coin he'll find for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that you're always going to be scared of those things in hand for TIZS. So might as well give yourself the best odds, which is TIZS has drawn not as many cards compared to next turn to get that 2 damage face. And Flurry's just setting up a very obvious clock, but one that TIZS can't necessarily stop with this hand. He has Skull, outcastable next turn, really wants to hit Ooze and the Eldraki Warblades.
Yeah.
Just thinking about whether Blade Dancing the 1 minion is worth it here.
It's one of those situations where then his whole turn starts to become pretty questionable, because he could have got away with not going for the Soul Shear, of course, and just gone with Twin Slice instead.
Well, maybe he wanted to get the fragments in the deck. That's somewhat a consideration for the healing.
I think I probably like holding on to it for here. You know, he knows that there's another stealth minion in hand with the sneaky delinquent ghost coming into play.
I just think that if you're not Blade Dancing there, it means you're not going for Skull this turn. And I kind of thought he had to go for Skull as soon as possible to look for Ooze, because this type of race just doesn't get there.
I don't think that's necessarily true, actually. I think with... I agree it's looking bad for him, you know, but he didn't have to go for Skull on that turn in order to try and find a way to survive. He can just hit face this turn, hit face the next turn, and if he can find some healing along the way, maybe off the Skull on turn 7, it's definitely not over.
Fate awaits you in the ashes.
But healing he has is Eldraki, so if you're hitting with that, you're getting less damage in to get a little bit of healing in. I will say, though, that my line is very much caster visioning on the hand Flurry had, which is double eviscerate, so I'm definitely putting the clock probably 1 turn faster than what TIZS would anticipate on average. And Flurry now has drawn the Secret Passage. Not the play for next turn, but reloading the eviscerate looks good to me as long as he can get either the Hooked Scimitar through or Secret Passage to find extra damage, depending on whether his heals or not.
Well, that's the start of the turn he needs to turn things around here. He can get up to 14 damage on this turn. Close to lethal.
Oh, this Soul Fragment is huge. It was a little bit too late. But he's out of range now of 1 Hooked Scimitar. And he can very easily set up counter lethal, but he can't deal with the minions.
No mana. Even I-beam off the top.
Man, I'm so unused to having Rogue with relevant minions on board.
Yeah.
This late in the game. But they will be the deciding factor here. Flurry easily getting through the Hooked Scimitar lethal.
And I think it really shows, in my opinion, how good the matchup is for the Demon Hunter usually, because Flurry got the absolute dream hand there. He got the perfect curve of minions into the sword, buffing it up, drawing cards, dealing a bunch of damage. There was little that TIZS could do, but even at the end of that, he was 2 damage off lethal. He very, very nearly turned things around all the way back. and got the counter loop.
The deck goes fast and furious, but that rogue will be now what Flurry wants to continue the streak with. TIZS without Demon is definitely looking a bit unfavored now, I have to say.
Yeah.
Priest is what TIZS has left, and we were thinking that the Demon Hunter was TIZS's best chance to get wins against Flurry's more aggressive decks. Now that the Priest has to go up against the Rogue and potentially the Mage from Flurry, I'm starting to have my doubts.
Yeah, having to go against the Mage and the Rogue, it's got to obviously win 2 in a row, which puts you unfavored usually. But I think you could make a very strong argument for the Priest being favored in both of these matchups, even if it's just ever so slightly. The Ooze, obviously, it's only a one-of, given that it's a Highlander deck, but could be a huge deal. Zephyrus often functions as a second weapon removal in the matchup against Rogue, where it is just so absolutely crucial to hit that removal every single turn.
It does have to happen pretty consistently, though, because the Rogue can go very, very quick, sometimes before the Priest can even think about getting value with their Apotheosis, and Flurry has once again hit that self-sharpening sword. With a hand like that and a one-drop guaranteed, I was thinking of keeping Dr. Krastenov, but I suppose it doesn't necessarily give you a mid-game play if you need to coin out the sword, which is so often the case.
I don't hate that, because Dr. Krastenov is the late game of the deck. That's as high as it goes. With 5 mana, as Cutting Class and Dread Corsair don't really count as their original mana costs. And even though you raise a good point that you're missing out on like turns 3 and 4 a little bit, you're fairly likely to find that. That is the vast majority of where the deck lies. So I actually agree with you. I would have liked to have seen the Krastenov held onto there.
It's pretty interesting. This turn for Flurry, I mean, the line A of thinking is that, cool, I have a bunch of these stealth minions, they die really easily in the late game. Give myself the best chance of having them stick several attacks here, but the exact punish is there from TIZS's hand in the Breath of the Infinite. That's going to be devastating for Flurry.
It's a one-off. It's unlikely to come down. Even Zephyrus here wouldn't be able to offer necessarily a guaranteed clear. It's really the Breath of the Infinite that is the one absolutely devastating card for Flurry.
But he does pick up the Deadly Poison, which I'm kind of into just equipping it right now.
Yeah.
Because it just gets in across 4 charges, 8 extra damage.
Oh!
That from TIZS. Yeah.
Well,
Flurry knows what's up.
He played around it. He's got coin. He's got Deadly Poison still. You know, that's something at the very least. It's not much.
I just feel like with this rogue deck, you can't really afford to play around anything. You gotta go all in, fast and furious. And it's clear to say, with either game plan, Flurry would have lost to the opener that TIZS had with both the Breath of the Infinite and the Ooze.
Yeah.
But yeah, even if we look at full hand Secret Passage refill that Flurry can get, given that he's committed this Deadly Poison and it's not gonna go on a second sword, not really seeing it for Flurry. There's also just Apotheosis in hand.
Yeah. I mean, the combos are just absolutely insane. Wretched Tutor into Apotheosis is disgusting on turn 7 when that rolls around.
Right, just gonna do his best at reading the hand. He can play all of the stuff he got from Secret Passage.
Yeah, I mean,
he is hardly even scratching TIZS's health total.
It's tough, right? Because the Toxin Blade and the Eviscerate are the 2 cards that are going to stay in hand at the end of the turn. So I kind of wanted to see Wand Thief played on that turn, weirdly enough, to try and find an answer instead. But this does, I suppose, generate the highest amount of tempo.
Yeah, I also wanted to see the Wand Thief come down. He still could have killed the Kel'Thuzad, but it would involve trading his stealth minion, so I suppose that was the kicker.
So this is like the one awkward turn, I guess, if you could even call it that for TIZS, and it's still pretty much insane.
I don't think this is awkward whatsoever.
Yeah, it's really not. I'm trying to paint any kind of a hope here for Flurry, but I am not seeing it.
Well, I've never seen Wretched Tutor Apotheosis comboed out before, but definitely looks like a very demoralizing thing to see from Flurry's position.
Mm-hmm. How can I kill thee? Let me count the ways.
That's your second literature reference of the day, Derek.
Yeah.
Stepping up the game.
Yeah, what can I say? I'm a smart guy who knows lots of quotes but has no idea who wrote them or what they're in. Well, there's the burst damage. That's the end part of the game taken care of. Just needs to find a little middle bit, the kind of 90% of the journey he needs to make, and then it'll be just fine.
Grades getting low.
I'm just gonna watch the show. I think the least TIZS could do here is just
Sure.
play his turns as fast as possible.
Yeah.
That is just a sign of respect.
Yeah. I mean, even holding on to the Apotheosis here, like, I guess it makes sense because he'd just be overhealing drastically and doesn't want to be sapped into the Apotheosis dying.
Your mind
Just
is not
play your 6-mana Yeti, TIZS. Okay. Oh man. Worst thing about fighting against priests is you know you're dead, but they just can't kill you. I think Flurry can take this nice, slow period of time to reflect on the next matchup that he'll have to queue up, which is the main.
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to find any way that this could possibly be viewed as valuable time, because I'm not seeing any way at all that he could possibly conceivably get back into this game outside of, I guess, one thief into puzzle box. Even in Rogue now, Gia, we have to consider the possibility of Box winning the game.
Okay, that's fair. You found an out. I'm really proud of you, Dark, because I really could not think of any single one. So now I have something to think about other than this dinner that's staring at me. So if we are looking to draw into one thief, you do not want to play Greyheart Sage for tempo because you want to combo it off with a stealth minion and draw into one thief as soon as possible. Can you throw any more literature quotes at me, Derek?
Any more?
Is clear. Your demise.
What,
None
with
that
a
come to the,
Hearthstone
the top
spin
of
on
my head.
them?
I'm Harry Potter, but I'm in Hearthstone. Hmm?
Your mind is not your
Huh? Oh, is this a guessing game?
No, it's just me being relentlessly unfunny.
Oh, I thought you were trying to give me a riddle. I would have been so down for that.
Oh, well, yeah, that wasn't really a real one, was it?
I was thinking of Razzle Freshman.
Oh, right, okay.
Right?
Yeah, I get
That
you.
could have been sort of a
Yeah,
riddle.
right. I mean, he's more Ron, right? That's the ginger vibe he's got rocking.
That's fair.
Primordial Studies can't even
Okay.
discover Prime, though, right? Because it's rogue, so you can't get Solarian, which would be the other out, I suppose.
You can discover the 4/4 guy to give you a spell? Wait. Is that a mage card too?
No, that's a neutral.
Okay.
I mean, Malagos Sinister Strike? I guess that's where we're at.
Yeah.
If he can discover another one so he gets double discount, he can go 7 mana Malagos Sinister Strike, Eviscerate, and then still be 15 damage off lethal.
This is harder than the puzzle labs, Derek. I just don't see a solution.
There's nothing. Finally, however, it looks like TIZS is approaching lethal.
And there you have it. That was a slog of a last match. And it does tend to go that way sometimes when you're facing against Priest. I have to say, Flurry has more fortitude than any Hearthstone player I've seen on GM before. I feel like 99.9% of players would have conceded that 4 turns before Flurry did, or even earlier.
I will agree, but based on Shaxi's win that he got today against specifically TIZS, no one can be forgiven for sticking in a game that looks like it's absolutely unwinnable. It was worth sticking it out there for the end, even as we meme on, as we are wont to do. It does mean that Flurry is left with only his mage now up against the priest for TIZS. And even though on ladder, I've found that mage is hovering around a 50% win rate, in my opinion, up against the priest, you're able to, oftentimes get enough juice to keep going and eventually find the lethal. I will say that as players have gotten better at priest, the lists have got more refined. I don't love Flurry's position that he's in today.
Yeah, there's also Flurry's particular list, which is not running Shanvala or Jandis, and I don't mind not having Shanvala in there because it's the size of minion that gets very, very easily stolen by priests. I feel that the lack of Jandis can a little bit. I find that the mage needs to have a little bit of minion presence before they really go off in order to pressure priests enough to get the win.
Well, it's already a decently powerful tempo hand at the start of the game for Priest, which is very important. You know, you do need to be making sure that you are keeping up on board, not losing too much to chip damage, and especially when you get Zephyrus raised dead in your starting hand. It's looking really good for TIZS out of the starting gate.
Absolutely. For Flurry, he does have this arcane intellect to try and put together the resources. Mage in these slower matchups definitely wants to build up the big combo rather than piecing it out a little bit each turn. But her for TIZS is just looking very, very difficult to deal with.
Is being in a TIZS just a British Englishism, or is that something that you've heard of before?
I have never heard of it before. I'm gonna guess that it's like being in a pickle? No?
Kind of, like being in a TIZS, it's kind of like you're a bit grumpy, I think I would describe it as instead. Which I think is what I would describe Flurry as right here. He is absolutely in a bit of a TIZS.
Thy blood be born again.
Absolutely. TIZS there could have gone for the Cabal Seal to start off, and then coined. Oh, sorry. The mana didn't work out perfectly there. So Raise Dead instead as the activator makes a lot of sense.
Oh.
Yeah, this is pretty brutal.
What do you do? What do you do as the mage without, getting a Sorcerer's Apprentice to be able to get something going here? There's just nothing.
I mean, he just plays Grass and just hopes it sticks for a while as he stalls towards more card draw. It's a decently sized minion, but you know there's a Zephyrus in hand, so it feels futile.
Like, what? Even at a baseline level, if you just go, Kaj, Coin, Zephyrus, Shadow Word, Pain, that's pretty disgusting in terms of seizing the board. That's probably not even the best line.
You sound like you're in a TIZS, Derek.
I am in a TIZS.
You're just projecting onto Flurry. Ever since the last game, you were bottling up those emotions, and it all just came out in a big, what do you do?
I mean, Sol just notified us that apparently this is the, third Zephyrus Raised Dead that he's had in his starting hand of the day. It's disgusting.
Feels like Flurry's had a good amount of those too. And obviously, it's going to culminate in TIZS' favor here. But I can see more outs for this position compared to the one Flurry was in last game. So I'm going to try and do what you did last game. And just really optimistic about Flurry's chances. If the Sorcerer's Apprentice comes off the top next turn, Evocation can generate ways to stall the board.
I mean, if my hand reading ability, by which I mean literally reading the body language of TIZS by how he moves his hand, is any indicator, he was just counting up Bloodlust lethal as I was on that turn, which is getting surprisingly close over the next couple of turns. It's really starting to rack up.
Well, he does know that the evocation is in hand right now. Not that he can play around it. Probably just take the Conjurer's Calling and play it for tempo. Set up for the lethal next
good.
turn.
I must consider. The end begins.
Okay, I guess he can still develop a lot of tempo with the Psycho Pomp. It very likely culminates in lethal next turn with the Bloodlust. Or without even the
Okay, Flurry,
Bloodlust, to
one
be
time.
honest.
Apprentice off the top. Pop off evocation. Let's go.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh, oh.
Alright. We're
Is the
looking
dream
at
alive?
freezes. We're
Yep.
looking at magic tricks to give a way to generate another evocation because the freeze
Yeah.
for just this turn is not enough. There's the magic trick.
That's
There's
cheap.
freezes.
That's a lot of cheap. Font of Power, we'll take that too. Oh, even
Yeah.
Potion of Illusion. Oh, go! You gotta go. Just go. Go. Play your cards.
He needs to go magic trick right now.
Yeah.
The potion, not 100% that you play that because he could be looking at Cone of Cold, but since he has Razor Frost, I also like going for potion. Just give yourself another Apprentice. Or even another Solarian. He could just go Solarian, potion, double Ray of Frost magic trick.
Right.
Oh, the Dune guy.
Dune guy. Is that a literary reference as well to Dune?
Yes, to a meme. Memes are literature.
Well, Frostnova passed up here instead, trying to cycle through, I guess, more with his deck. That does make sense. He needs more options if he's going to have any chance of wrestling this back whatsoever.
With an evocation used, though, we're looking at magic tricks now as the out to get more
Right.
evocations. I don't know, in spots like these, I'm always just thinking of you need a way to make a box. And there's a lot of ways to make boxes in this deck. And sometimes the Solarian Prime is good enough as half a box. So for TIZS, you could just be thinking about defensive Zephrys, get your Shadow Madness, deny the Prime.
That's what I was definitely looking at, is just a baseline play.
That's a lot of cheap as well.
You'd absolutely take that.
Madness
Even
a little bit
has
too
the
late.
dragon as well. Yeah, you take that. Tick.
I mean, he Madness and then kill off the. Yeah, I like this. Use
Great
the
spot there
Arcane
by
Breath.
TIZS. Yeah, I'm laughing, but that is unironically definitely the best play that he can make in that situation.
He's just denying any shenanigans possible for Flurry. Which means I gotta go back to the drawing board and invent another 0.001% outer for Flurry. Magic tricks are still in there, which means evocation can still be generated, which means freezes can still be generated.
I mean, he has Mana Giant
okay.
plus Conjurer's Calling, like he can go
Okay,
Grom
Walking
or
Fountain?
something like that. Walking Fountain as well, yeah, that's a big one.
I wonder.
is the Dune guy worth it? For one generation this turn?
The problem
He'll
is
have
that
3 mana remaining.
development does nothing. He knows that the Zephrys is in hand. It doesn't matter if he plays the Giants or not.
I mean, he has to play something to get the Zephrys out of hand and then just hope the second giant can do something.
Right.
Second giant conj, that is.
I mean, one thing I will say is that this Dune Sculptor could have been an Antonidas. He did pick Dune Sculptor over Antonidas, which I was skeptical of at the time.
Well, Lucent Bark is annoying for TIZS.
Uh-huh.
But he can kill it many ways. Or he can ignore it and just play Alex Straza, but I feel like that line is the worst.
Yeah, as long as you're clearing the board here, it should just be an easy peasy win.
Yeah, so how's the best this way? Shadow Madness, the Dune guy, He can ruin the 5/5.
It's just dead. That's just it. It's just dead. 2 Holy Smites and it's gone.
Uh-huh. I think he was just thinking about whether there was a Zephyrus lethal as well.
Oh, right,
But
right.
this is absolutely fine.
Oh! Reno in a Highlander deck as well.
I'm just losing it. Oh, man.
Okay, double Grom, but you need a way to activate them, and that's still not lethal, even if you could.
I'm just still thinking of walking fountains to survive. Power into
Reckless. Double
Sure.
Argent Commander. Things are happening. There's the hint of a chance. Although is his just got lethal every time here? Not quite.
Well, this has spell damage on it, so he just goes Holy Smite, Guy, trade the taunt. Yeah.
And then
Zephyrus. I mean, Apotheosis.
Oh, Fireball. Yeah,
Zephyrus,
that's
Fireball. Yep.
yeah. The line has been found. Zephyrus will always find a way when you're at this late stage of the game to close it out. And TIZS, 3 games to 2, does end up the victor. Flurry did just end up losing the series going 0-2 today, so I don't want to be too much kicking a man while he's down. But what I will say is I think TIZS was the deserved victor, playing very, very well for the most part over the course of that series, and taking advantage of a couple of mistakes along the way from Flurry.
Even in the first series, TIZS was looking absolutely on form there. And even though you and I were admittedly memeing pretty hard towards game and the last game, TIZS was 100% still in the zone there, making sure that even though he was well over 99% favored to win from every position, he was considering every single out there, making sure that Flurry had as little of a possible chance to get back in the game, going so far as to steal the Solarian and kill it off immediately to deny the Prime. And that shows that TIZS absolutely deserves to be where he is right now in GM.
Absolutely. And that, of course, means that Flurry is unfortunately out of the running for this week. If you're unsure where we are in Grandmasters, you can, of course, go to playhearthstone.com/esports to get all the information. But basically, given that this is week 2, our first 3 weeks, each function like an individual tournament. So Flurry definitely not out of GM or anywhere close to that quite yet. He'll be back next week trying to fight for his spot to get as many points as possible in the first 3 weeks. But for our next match, we do need to let TIZS get ready, prepared to try and take down Shaxi as our decider match for the day. So we're going to go to an ever so slightly longer break, around 5 to 7 minutes or so, I'd imagine, to let TIZS get set up. But when we come back, our final match of the day for Asia Pacific is going to be Shaxi up against TIZS, and it is going to be a good one.